Okay, so I was asked to talk about the future of AI, and I'm going to talk about it with respect to, obviously, my own personal opinion. I've been in this game long before it was fashionable. You know, any of you who know about the history of AI know that it has many peaks and troughs. It has summers and winters. Right now we're basking in the sunshine of an AI summer. But will it last? Well, who knows? So what is the future of AI? Some might say it's robots. We're going to have amazing robots that look like us, and they talk like us, and they're going to be able to do lots of clever things. I don't know. Some people, you might think they're talking about magic software from the claims they make.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, maybe Harry Potter. Other people say it's going to be terrifying superintelligences. I personally believe we can't do any of those three words at the moment. We can't really do intelligence, we can't do very super, and we certainly can't make them terrifying. Is it machine learning? Well, if the future of AI is machine learning, then the future is now, because, well, we've got machine learning. We're pretty good at machine learning. So what is the future? Well, often a good way to think about what the future might be is to look at the past. So if we go back to 1951, here's what a researcher was talking about. It was a researcher who was making a maze-solving machine, and he was using language like this. He was talking about remembering and forgetting. He was talking about this little maze-solving robot having a neurosis, having an anti-neurotic circuit, even, is it going to be psycho or not? This sounds like very strange language back in the 1950s, the early 50s. I mean, programmable computers had barely been created. So who was this strange guy who was talking about this? Well, it was Claude Shannon. And if those of you, well, I hope you all know who Claude Shannon is. If you don't know who Claude Shannon is, look him up. Basically, he could be rightly called the father of computer science. He's certainly the father of artificial intelligence. He and his student, Marvin Minsky, helped create the first ever conference on artificial life. But, of course, Claude invented many other things as well, and if you don't know about it, look him up. So back in 1951, we had AI. A very rudimentary AI, but we had it. Let's go back a year before that. A different researcher was using words like this. He was saying, and many of you probably can guess who this was, he was saying that by the end of the century, which I'm afraid is now 18 years ago, one would be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. I'm not sure he quite got that one right, but you can see his aspirations. You can read the rest of his opinion as well. Who was this far-seeing researcher back in 1950? Well, this was Alan Turing, another pioneer in computing, let alone artificial intelligence. But he was a pioneer in artificial intelligence as well. Well, let's go back even further. Let's go back to 1945. And we had a researcher here talking about how a computer works, some kind of strange computer with specialized organs. He's talking about a central control organ. He's talking about associative neurons in the human nervous system, sensory afferent, motor or efferent neurons. He's using very biological language to describe this machine back in 1945. Now, who could this be? Well, this is John von Neumann, and this is the document that described the first ever programmable computer, the first readable description of how to build a programmable computer. So even if you go back to the birth of programmable computers themselves, we're using very biological, very kind of brain-inspired language. And of course, one could argue artificial intelligence, the creation of intelligence thought by some kind of machine, would even predate programmable computers. But it's clear that AI has always been inspired by biology. Indeed, you could say computing has always been inspired by biology. But this is something that's very close to my heart. This is something I've been doing for 20 or 30 years now, working with biologists. And the nice thing about working with biologists and looking at living systems is we discover what might be possible. And if you think about many of the innovations today, think about deep learning, which is basically a kind of neural network. Okay, it doesn't look very much like the brain anymore, but it was inspired by the brain. So from living systems, we get to understand, we get to imagine what might be possible. So maybe that'll help us determine, or help us predict what the future of AI might be. But I actually rather like the definition of artificial intelligence. That's the second line. That AI enables computers to do what they currently cannot. Really, AI researchers are at the forefront of computing. If it's really tricky to get a computer to do it, we often call it AI. As soon as the computer can do it, we tend not to call it AI anymore. It's just what computers do. So actually, throughout the history of computing, all these clever innovations that you now take for granted, even things like multitasking in operating systems, that came out of an AI lab. I don't think of it as AI anymore, but it was then. So mainstream computing just sucks all these innovations into it. And whether AI is still fashionable in 5 or 10 years or not, all these innovations, this is the good side, all these innovations, we'll continue to use them. We might not want to call it AI anymore. When I started doing my, I guess it was just after my PhD, so the mid to late 90s, AI was a dirty word, you couldn't say it. So my department in UCL is not called an AI department, it's called the Intelligent Systems Department because of that. In those days, you couldn't get funding. It was an AI winter. So let's think about it then. If AI is about making computers what they currently do, what they currently cannot do, then what can't we do with computers right now? What we can do, we can classify and predict from data. It's very successful. And you'll find probably a very large percentage of the papers being presented today are about doing exactly this. But what we still struggle to do is predict the behavior of complex systems. In a sense, that kind of goes with the territory. By definition, a complex system is an unpredictable system. So how could you possibly predict the unpredictable? But one could argue, isn't that kind of the point of the brain? If it's predictable, if a living system lives in a world where the outcome of everything is predictable, well, look at a plant. It's kind of predictable what happens. If you grow towards the light, it's kind of predictable you're going to get light. So you don't need a brain if you're a plant. If you live in a fairly simple world, you don't need a brain. If you live in a world where things are very complex, you have to try and predict the unpredictable, you kind of need a brain. So one could argue that's what brains are for. So I would argue the future of AI is going beyond just classifying, predicting from data. It's looking at the difficult stuff. It's trying to predict the behavior of complex systems. And with this in mind, I'm going to give you some examples of the sort of thing that we do. So how about developers? Software developers. One could argue a few thousand software developers might be quite unpredictable. How could you possibly predict what an ecosystem of developers might develop next? So we thought about this. We thought about the App Store, which has quite a lot of apps these days. And we decided to predict the behavior of developers, we predict the behavior of app stores. So we actually modeled the iOS App Store. We modeled, and when I say model, we're using a kind of agent-based modeling. So computers are now powerful enough, we can represent thousands upon thousands of apps as abstract notions of apps in our model. We can represent users, all the millions of users, we can have a little agent for every user. All the developers, the hundreds of thousands of developers, we can have an agent for each one of those. We can model the kinds of features that a user might want, and we do, as a kind of matrix of possible features that they might like or not like. The apps either have or don't have some of these features. The developers choose strategies to create apps with or without some of these features. And the strategies that these developers follow, well, it's up to them. We let them decide. We let them learn their own strategies of software development. Some of them are innovation. Some of them are copycat. If an app's doing very well in the store, one developer might copy that app and tune it slightly so that they do their version of it. We see this a lot in the App Store. When Angry Birds was super successful, you had many varieties of Angry Birds come out. Angry pigs, angry whatevers, you know. The copycat strategy is quite successful. So we did this. We also calibrated it, and this is a key point when you're modeling a complex system. You need real data to calibrate it. So we did one of the world's biggest ever surveys of users of apps. Across the world, we had surveys that were translated into many different languages, and we gathered a lot of data about their demographics and the kinds of apps that they like, and so on. From this, we also modeled their social networks, how they communicate, how the users communicate with each other. We were able to show that users tell each other about the apps that they like, and certain apps cause almost a viral spread. So a particularly successful app that a lot of users like gets spread around by word and mouth, and you can map out how this spread continues. You can show how different publicity strategies that a developer might use can affect the uptake, or let's say the number of downloads for that app. You can analyze how modifying the App Store itself can affect the number of downloads for different developers. So indeed, the advantage of this kind of model is we can ask what-if questions. What if the App Store looked like this? What if developers were not allowed to do certain things? What if we imposed certain rules in the store? So we're able to show a lot of interesting things. Indeed, one of the things we did show, which is perhaps a little bit depressing for app developers, is that the App Store is very much like an iceberg. Only the very tiniest tip of it is visible to users. Most of the apps are beneath the surface, and the users really never get to see them. There are now, I've lost count of how many apps there are, but I think there's several million in the iOS store. There's no way that your average user can go through several million. They only see a tiny, tiny proportion. So it's now becomes a marketing exercise. How best to present apps to users, how best to allow users to find them. And so this becomes not just a predictive tool about what strategies might work if you're a developer, but also a predictive tool of what marketing will work if you're a developer, or if you're the App Store owner itself. How do you best modify the App Store so that you, as the holder of the apps, make the most money because you take a cut of everything that gets sold? So this is an example, one example of how you can predict the behavior of complex systems. This is an ecosystem of people developing software for other people. And indeed, it was very successful, and it got a lot of publicity in itself, this work. So what about a different kind of complex system? What about something that is really quite significant to all of us? Can we predict the behavior of cancer? Unfortunately, this is still one of our biggest killers. And cancer is a very complicated thing. There's not one kind of cancer. Cancer is caused by a chain of mutations that occur in a particular cell. And depending on which cell it started, it's a different kind of cancer. So if it starts in your brain, then you've got some kind of brain tumor. Even if it spreads somewhere else, it's still a brain tumor. If it starts in your bones, different kind. If it starts in your colon. So the problem with cancer is we really struggle to understand how tumors first form and how they change over time. The existing treatments that we have are really based on trial and error. We have drugs that were first discovered through things like mustard gas. It was discovered when these toxic gases were used during the war. If they didn't kill you, sometimes they cured your cancer. And so some of our chemotherapy is actually based on that. What it's doing is it's killing off the cells within us that divide most rapidly. It kills off all cells that divide. But tumor cells divide very rapidly, and so they tend to get kicked a bit harder, let's say. But that's why your hair falls out. That's why you feel utterly miserable on chemotherapy, because you're killing off all the cells in your body that are trying to divide. It's not a nice treatment. Even today, we have some of the world's best cancer institutes, and they're doing some amazing machine learning, usually based on statistical studies of data. They're predicting possible new drugs, but they don't know how they work. And this is a bit of a problem, because we actually would rather like to understand how and why tumors develop. If we can understand why they're caused, how they change over time, maybe we can tailor treatments to individual patients. If we can understand exactly what your tumor looks like, the problem with tumors is they're heterogeneous, they're not homogeneous. As they grow, more and more mutations happen. So what is the state of your tumor? How many different kinds of cells have you got? If you apply the wrong therapy at the wrong time, you might kill off part of the tumor that's actually suppressing the growth of the rest of it. And this actually happens. So you can actually have it go into remission for a little while, and then it grows much faster because you've killed off actually quite an important part of it. So we model this. We have experts that model individual cells. We model the gene networks within those cells. Again, this is a kind of agent-based model, but here the agents are cells and they're communicating with them according to biological data. And this data comes straight from the literature, and if the literature is not good enough, then we work directly with the biologists and we do experiments in the wet labs to get the data that we need. So in this example, we're looking at colon cancer. This is an intestinal crypt, and in your colon, a crypt is basically like a little dimple, and from this, these are the equivalent of kind of stem cells. These cells are the ones that grow and push upwards to become the surface of the lining of your colon, and then little villi stick up, and these are the things that absorb food as it passes. But because food is constantly pushing cells away from the lining of your gut, you've got to keep growing new cells all the time. So that's why you've got these little dimples within the lining of your gut that are constantly providing new cells. But wherever you've got a rapid growth of cells in your body, it's more likely, unfortunately, to become cancerous. So in this case, what we study is what happens if some of these cells get certain kinds of mutation. How do these cells then spread? How quickly do they spread? What kinds of mutation affects the spread of these cells? And indeed, if we apply therapies to them, what effect will the therapies have? So we're able to trace the full lineage of these cells. It's a computer. We can ask whatever questions we like. We can do experiments that are really impossible to do in the wet lab. You cannot really take a piece of a healthy, or let's say a pre-cancerous patient. You don't know they're about to get cancer. You can't take a bit of their gut and study it in detail before they get it. And once they've got it, it's too late. You don't know what caused it. So you can have a go with mice, but it's tremendously difficult to trace the origin of these tumors. It's very difficult to cut open a tumor and trace exactly which cell came from which cell. We can answer these questions, and we can actually, and we are doing, we're proving or disproving hypotheses that biologists are putting forward, and we're also saying, well, our results are suggesting that this might be a causal factor, and allowing the biologists to go back into the wet labs and test these hypotheses. So this is a long-term piece of research. Already in the past, we've looked at prostate cancer, and some of our findings are affecting the way treatments are now being prescribed in the States. But this is let's say this is an informed view. We're trying to understand this complex system. By understanding it, we can then potentially take blood samples from a patient and use those to calibrate the model, and so the model will then represent you. And then we have a good estimate of what your health is like, and then we can potentially tailor the treatment for you specifically. The aim here is to turn this into a chronic disease. We're not trying to say we're going to cure cancer. The aim for all of this kind of research is to say, what if we can just manage it? What if it just becomes something that you live with? Okay, you might have to adjust the treatments every so often, but if we know exactly what the state of this disease is within a patient, you can live indefinitely with it. But the only way you can do that is to completely understand what's going on. This is a very complex system. It's like a nasty little alien organism made out of bits of you that's growing inside of you and changing and trying to overcome your immune system and pushing blood vessels into itself to keep growing. But you have to understand it to tackle it properly. So how about, let's say, one of the most unlikely things that we could try and predict? How about predicting the behavior of irrational, unpredictable people? What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to show you some videos. These are all people that are supposed to be working with each other. These are all people who, let's say, these are their colleagues. And sometimes, when you work with people, you don't get along so well. Now you might say, okay, this is a detention center, high pressure, maybe the sort of people they are results in this kind of violence. This wouldn't happen in other situations, surely. Well, this is a kind of receptionist environment. A little discussion. All very unfortunate. So we could say, okay, what about a nice, safe hospital environment? Surely, when a nurse comes along, it'll all be happy. You can imagine what they're saying. I had to sort of quieten the sound because the language is not really appropriate for. and the patient is not believing what's happening. Anyway, you get the idea. So this is they're working on the phone. You can see the guy on the right is just being quite annoying and constantly throwing little bits of paper at his colleague. So it goes on, you know. These are all examples of professionals who should know better. And this is perhaps closest to home for us. And these are clearly students. They're working in a normal environment, and you can see the reaction of head in the hands and playing with the hair, and it's a full-blown argument. Okay, software developers don't tend to punch each other, but you can see they're not having a fun time here. These are not very productive individuals. They're just having a full-out row. So why does this happen? These are people who are supposed to be working together. And one would say, well, if you think about most existing models, there's a lot of models on the evolution of cooperation. And often people working together, we think of it in terms of, well, it's in our self-interest. If we all cooperate, we'll all benefit. But there's actually been very little work on what happens when we all are trying to work together for the same goal. Those studies of evolution of cooperation assume that we all have our own separate goals. But what about when we're all working in a team for the same goal? Why? Logically, if you follow the traditional models, if we're rational, we will all benefit by cooperating. But clearly, as you saw then, we're not rational. And so the fundamental thing missing from models of human collaboration is irrationality. It's personality. Unfortunately, and I think we all can probably remember examples of when we're trying to work with someone and through some communication problem, some personality issue, they get very angry with you, you get very angry with them. It just doesn't work somehow. People get fired over this. People get unhealthy over this. People, it causes havoc. It actually costs industries millions. So if you look at personalities, and there's been a lot of work on how personalities affect the way we behave, then this is one interpretation. And I'm not saying all of psychology is perfect. Psychology has a mixed history. But what we can do with computational models is we can try them out. We can take a theory such as this, and this is paying attention to Jung's theory, Jung's psychology theory, and we've got, basically we're paying attention to characteristics such as introverts or extroverts, intuition versus kind of sensing people, thinkers versus feelers, that kind of thing. So these are well-established personality types. These are used in what's called a Myers-Briggs personality test, which is used throughout the industry. And so we can model this. We can say, what if we model a bunch of individuals who have personalities? We set them a collaborative task, a really easy one. Here's a goal, okay? This is a problem space. The solution is basically the peak in the middle. So find the best solution as a team, we can say, to our virtual collaborators. And then we can model each of these individuals working together, and this is the path that they took in this problem space. And if they're kind of moving together, then they're kind of thinking in the same direction. They're collaborating, they're talking with each other, they're communicating, they're sharing information depending on their personality types. Each of these agents is running a full model of a personality. In this example, the optimum is actually in the center. They converge on a suboptimal. And you can see some of these individuals really didn't contribute at all. This is not an effective collaboration. These personalities did not work together well. If this was the real world, these guys might well have been having an argument and it didn't work out. This is an example of a successful collaboration. Everybody converged to the same solution. They found the right answer. So we're able to study this in some depth and ask, okay, this isn't working anymore. Oh, there we go. Okay, and ask different questions. And indeed, you can try this out for yourself. We have a piece of software here which is not playing the video. Is this video working? I guess it's not working. Anyway, you can go online, and my colleague sulinglim.com/optimal, and you can actually see. It's a shame this one isn't working. No, this isn't working very well. But you can see how we actually do it. You can model different personalities, and someone can ask me a question because I'm obviously being told to shut up, so you can ask me how we do it and I'll explain it in the questions. But a quick bit of results. So we're able to show, for example, for different levels of uncertainty, for no uncertainty, extroverts, introverts, quite similar, but a team of more introverts generally does a little bit better than extroverts. But as soon as uncertainty becomes quite high, 20% uncertainty in a problem, you actually find the extroverts are doing quite well. Why is that? Because they're good at communicating. The introverts don't like to talk to each other so much. People who rely on sensing kind of immediate facts in front of them versus intuitives, people who like to collate broader information and form a kind of intuitive picture. So the sensors do very well, a little bit better when there's no uncertainty, but when uncertainty increases, those sensors, those people who like to rely on the facts, they really suffer. They find it very difficult to cope in uncertain environments, whereas the intuitives, they're never perfect, but they maintain a pretty good kind of solution. They're good at building this overall picture of things. Likewise, for thinkers versus feelers, well, the thinkers do pretty well when there's no uncertainty, but the feelers, those who like to empathize with their companions and work with their companions a little bit more, they do a little bit better when there's more uncertainty. So using this kind of tool, we're able to understand a little bit more about how different personalities can work together for different kinds of problem. Maya, who's sitting here, is actually looking at this right now, and you can ask her later. Maya is studying how this will work for different problems. We're also looking at different psychology theories, so we can model and test which psychology theories seem to work better. We can also look at optimal teams. So given a certain kind of problem, what would be the optimal composition of people to solve that problem? The nice thing about this is we can look inside their heads as well. So for intuitives who make a kind of mental picture of what the problem looks like, well, we're using a Gaussian process regression algorithm to form, if you like, their internal picture of what the problem space looks like. They start out, these are all intuitives, they start out with a pretty inaccurate view of the problem, and some of them end up, this is a very accurate view of what they think the problem is like. So they learn as they explore the space, and they form this mental image. So we can look inside their heads and understand even what they're thinking. So to conclude, AI has always been, and I think always will be, inspired by natural systems, and I think you should make a strong argument. This is what brains are for. If you're looking for the future of artificial intelligence, then look at what brains were first made for. You don't need a brain unless it is to try and predict the unpredictable. And that's exactly what I think we're likely to be moving towards in the future. We need to move beyond what we're currently doing. Existing machine learning, it's very nice, it was very effective, but we can do more. If you're interested, there's a few papers. I'm sure you can get a copy of this somewhere. Here's some of the things we've been up to, and I'll stop there. Thank you.